The morning sun blazed across the endless sand dunes of Afghanistan's Helmand province. Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he adjusted his rifle scope. The desert stretched out before his squad like a golden ocean, broken only by scattered rocks and the occasional thorn bush. "Contact ahead, 2 clicks out," whispered Corporal Jake Thompson through the radio static. The young soldier crouched behind a weathered boulder, his binoculars trained on a small village nestled between 2 hills. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and children could be seen playing in the dusty streets. Rodriguez had been leading patrols in this region for 8 months. He knew every ridge, every valley, every place where an enemy might hide. The Taliban had been unusually quiet for the past 3 weeks, which made everyone nervous. Quiet meant they were planning something big. "Looks peaceful enough," said Private First Class David Shun, the squad's medic. He was new to the desert, having arrived just 2 months ago from training in Georgia. The heat still bothered him, and he drank water constantly to stay hydrated. The squad of 12 soldiers had been walking since dawn, following reports of suspicious activity near the village of Karga. Local informants had whispered about strangers arriving in the night, men who spoke with foreign accents and carried heavy bags. In this war, heavy bags usually meant weapons or explosives. Rodriguez studied the terrain through his scope. The village sat in a natural bowl, surrounded by low hills covered in loose sand and scattered rocks. It was the perfect place for an ambush, which is why they approached from the north, where the hills were lower and offered better visibility. "Thompson, take Miller and Santos around the east side," Rodriguez ordered quietly. "Stay low and keep your eyes open. Shun, you're with me. We'll approach from the west." The remaining soldiers spread out in a defensive line, creating overlapping fields of fire. This was standard procedure, learned through months of dangerous patrols and too many close calls with hidden enemies. As they moved closer to the village, Rodriguez noticed something odd. The normal sounds of daily life were missing. No dogs barking, no children laughing, no women talking as they hung laundry. Even the chickens that usually scratched around every Afghan village were nowhere to be seen. "Sarge, this doesn't feel right," whispered Chun, his voice tight with nervousness. The young medic had good instincts, and Rodriguez had learned to trust them. Through his radio, Thompson's voice crackled with static. "Movement in the South Hill. Can't get a clear view, but something's up there." Rodriguez raised his hand, signaling the squad to halt. They were now about 800 meters from the village, close enough to see individual buildings, but far enough away to have room to maneuver if things went wrong. The silence stretched on, broken only by the whisper of wind across the sand. Rodriguez felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came before contact with the enemy. After 3 tours of duty, he had learned to trust that feeling. "All stations, hold position," he radioed to his team. "Something's not right here." Minutes passed like hours as the soldiers remained motionless, scanning the hills and buildings for any sign of threat. The sun climbed higher, making the sand shimmer with heat waves that distorted vision and made accurate observation difficult. Then it happened. The crack of a rifle shot echoed across the valley, followed immediately by the wet thud of a bullet hitting flesh. Private Martinez, who had been positioned on the squad's right flank, spun around and collapsed into the sand, blood spreading across his desert camouflage uniform. "Sniper, take cover!" Rodriguez shouted, diving behind the nearest rock formation. The squad scattered, each soldier finding whatever protection they could in the sparse desert landscape. But where had the shot come from? The sound had echoed off the hills, making it impossible to determine the shooter's location. Rodriguez scanned the ridge lines through his scope, looking for muzzle flash or movement, but saw nothing. Chim was already crawling toward Martinez, his medical bag in hand. The private was alive, but badly wounded, blood seeping from a hole in his shoulder. "I need to get him stabilized," Chin called out. Another shot rang out, this one kicking up sand just inches from Chin's head. The medic rolled sideways and pressed himself flat against the ground. "Where is he?" shouted Thompson from his position behind a cluster of rocks. I can't see anything. Rodriguez's mind raced through possibilities. The sniper had to be within 600 meters to make such accurate shots, but the surrounding hills seemed empty. There were no obvious hiding places, no buildings tall enough to provide a good shooting position. The squad was pinned down in open ground with minimal cover. Martinez needed medical attention, but every time Chun tried to reach him, another shot would force him back. The enemy sniper seemed to have a perfect view of their position, suppressing fire on the south hill. Rodriguez ordered. 3 soldiers opened up with their rifles, sending rounds into the slope where Thompson had spotted movement earlier. But the return fire kept coming from a different direction entirely. Minutes dragged by as the deadly game of cat and mouse continued. The sniper would fire, the squad would return fire toward the suspected position, but the next shot would come from somewhere else entirely. It was like fighting a ghost. Rodriguez studied the pattern of shots. Each one was precise, aimed at soldiers who exposed themselves even slightly. This wasn't some amateur with a rusty rifle. This was a professional, someone with military training and high-quality equipment. The sergeant made a decision that went against every tactical manual he had ever read. Instead of trying to locate the sniper from their current position, he would have to move. But moving in open ground against a hidden marksman was suicide, unless the marksman wasn't where everyone expected him to be. Rodriguez began studying the ground around them with new eyes. The shots were coming from close range, but not from the obvious positions on the hills. That meant the sniper had to be much closer, hidden somewhere that provided both concealment and a clear field of fire. The sand dunes. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The shooter wasn't on the hills at all. He was buried in the sand somewhere nearby, probably in a prepared position that had been dug days or even weeks earlier. All stations, check your 6 o'clock, he radioed quietly. Sniper's not on the hills. He's in the sand. The squad members began scanning the ground around them, looking for any sign of disturbance in the sand that might indicate a hidden position. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack, except the needle could kill them. Another shot rang out, and this time Rodriguez saw it. A tiny puff of sand erupted from a dune about 200 meters to their rear, a position they had walked past without noticing anything unusual. The enemy sniper had let them pass, then opened fire from behind. It was a classic ambush technique, but executed with deadly precision. Target acquired. Rodriguez whispered into his radio. 200 meters, bearing 180. Prepare for coordinated fire on my mark. But as he lined up a shot on the suspected position, something made him pause. The sand around the sniper's location was completely undisturbed, except for that one small puff where the muzzle had protruded. How had someone managed to dig in so perfectly that 12 experienced soldiers had walked right past without noticing? The answer would come soon enough, but it would challenge everything Rodriguez thought he knew about desert warfare. Rodriguez held his breath and squeezed the trigger. His shot hit exactly where he had aimed, sending sand flying from the dune. For a moment, silence returned to the valley. Then, impossibly, another shot rang out from the same location. How is he still alive? Thompson shouted over the radio. You hit him dead center. The sergeant stared through his scope at the disturbed sand. Something was very wrong here. A direct hit from his rifle should have ended the threat, but the sniper was still active. Either his shot had missed completely, which was unlikely at this range, or they were dealing with something unexpected. Chun, how's Martinez? Rodriguez called out, keeping his eyes on the dune. Stable for now, but I need to get him to a medic station soon, Chun replied. He's losing blood, and this heat isn't helping. Rodriguez made a quick decision. Thompson, take your team and flank left. Get to that pile of rocks at 10 o'clock. When you're in position, lay down covering fire. I'm going to move on that dune. Sarge, that's suicide, Thompson protested. You'll be in the open for at least 50 meters. I've got an idea, Rodriguez replied. Just trust me and be ready to shoot. The sergeant began studying the sand between his position and the sniper's location. The surface looked uniform, but years of desert warfare had taught him to read the subtle signs that others might miss. There is a slight depression in the sand about halfway to the target, and there is a small area where the sand was a slightly different color. The pieces began falling into place in Rodriguez's mind. This wasn't a single sniper who had dug in recently. This was a prepared position, possibly part of a larger network of tunnels and hideouts that the enemy had been building for months. "All stations, listen up," he radioed. "We're not dealing with one guy in a hole. This is bigger than that. Stay alert for multiple shooters." As if summoned by his words, muzzle flashes erupted from 3 different locations around the valley. The squad found themselves taking fire from directions they hadn't even considered. Sand kicked up around their positions as bullets searched for targets. "We're surrounded," someone shouted over the radio. Rodriguez forced himself to remain calm. Panic would get them all killed. He studied the pattern of fire, looking for weaknesses in the enemy's positions. The shots were coordinated but not perfectly timed, which suggested multiple shooters communicating but not necessarily trained to work as a unified team. "Concentrate fire on the north position," he ordered. Everyone hit it at the same time. 12 rifles opened up simultaneously, sending a storm of bullets into the hillside where one of the muzzle flashes had appeared. The return fire from that position stopped immediately. But the other shooters adjusted their tactics, increasing their rate of fire to compensate for the loss of their teammate. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Chen was still trying to treat Martinez while bullets whined overhead. The medic's hands shook slightly as he worked to stop the bleeding, but his training kept him focused on the task. "I need 5 minutes without incoming fire," he called out. Rodriguez knew they didn't have 5 minutes. The enemy had them pinned in a carefully prepared killing zone, and more fighters could be moving into position at that very moment. They needed to break contact and get a safety, but carrying a wounded soldier across open ground under sniper fire seemed impossible. That's when he noticed something odd about the sand dune where the original shot had come from. The area around it was too perfect, too undisturbed. In a region where wind constantly reshapes the landscape, no dune stays that smooth for very long. The realization hit him like lightning. It wasn't a natural dune at all. It was camouflaged. "Thompson, you seeing what I'm seeing?" Rodriguez whispered into his radio. "What am I looking for, Sarge?" "That dune. Look at the edges where it meets the flat ground. See how sharp they are? Natural sand dunes have gradual slopes." Thompson studied the area through his binoculars. "Holy hell, it's fake. The whole thing is covered with something." Rodriguez felt a chill despite the desert heat. If the enemy had gone to such elaborate lengths to prepare this ambush site, they had been planning this operation for weeks or months. The American patrol routes must have been studied and memorized. This wasn't a chance encounter. It was a carefully orchestrated trap. "New plan," Rodriguez announced. "We're not trying to fight our way out of this. We're going to collapse their advantage." He reached for the grenades on his belt, estimating the distance to the fake dune. It was at the extreme range for a hand-thrown grenade, but possible if he got the angle right. "When I give the signal, everyone fires everything they've got at that dune. Don't aim for accuracy. Just put as much lead down range as possible." Rodriguez stood up, exposing himself to enemy fire, and hurled the grenade in a high arc toward the camouflage position. Bullets immediately began searching for him as he dove back to cover. The grenade exploded in the air about 20 feet above the dune, and the effect was dramatic. What had appeared to be solid sand suddenly collapsed, revealing a carefully constructed bunker underneath. Camouflage netting and artificial sand covering fell away, exposing wooden beams and sandbags. But more importantly, it revealed the sniper. The figure that rose from the destroyed hiding place wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of the typical Taliban fighter in robes and sandals, this was someone in professional military gear. Desert camouflage uniform, high-end rifle with advanced optics, and equipment that suggested special forces training. "Foreign fighter," Rodriguez whispered. "This isn't local Taliban." The sniper was wounded, but still dangerous. Try to relocate to his secondary position. Rodriguez could see him moving with the practiced efficiency of someone with extensive military training. This explained the accuracy and coordination of the ambush. "Take him down," Rodriguez shouted. Multiple rifles fired simultaneously, but the sniper was already moving, using the terrain and remaining camouflage to mask his retreat. He was heading toward another prepared position, probably part of the same network of hideouts. Rodriguez made a split-second decision that would determine whether his squad lived or died. Instead of trying to pursue the sniper or hold their current position, he would do something completely unexpected. "Everyone up. We're advancing directly on their positions." "Sarge, that's crazy," Thompson protested. "Trust me, they're expecting us to retreat or take cover. The last thing they'll expect is a frontal assault." Rodriguez grabbed Martinez under one arm while Chun took the other. The wounded soldier was conscious but weak from blood loss. "Can you move?" Rodriguez asked. Martinez nodded grimly. "Let's get these bastards." The squad rose as one and began advancing across the open ground, firing as they moved. It was the most dangerous maneuver in infantry tactics, but sometimes the most dangerous option was also the most surprising. The enemy's snipers, who had been positioned to pick off retreating soldiers, suddenly found themselves facing a coordinated advance. Their carefully prepared fields of fire were now working against them as the Americans closed the distance. But the real surprise was still coming. The squad's advance caught the enemy snipers completely off guard. Trained to pick off retreating soldiers from concealed positions, they weren't prepared for a direct assault across open ground. Rodriguez could see confusion in their movements as they tried to adjust their tactics. But the sergeant's real plan was just beginning to unfold. "Thompson, break right toward that cluster of rocks. Chun, stay with Martinez and find cover behind that low ridge. Everyone else spread out and keep moving forward." As his soldiers moved into position, Rodriguez continued studying the terrain with new understanding. The fake dune hadn't been the only prepared position. There were others scattered throughout the area, all carefully camouflaged to blend with the natural landscape. The enemy had turned this entire valley into a killing field, with interconnected firing positions and escape routes. But their elaborate preparations also created a weakness that Rodriguez intended to exploit. The sniper who had first opened fire was still moving between positions, and Rodriguez could track his movement by watching for the subtle disturbances in the sand that marked the hidden pathways between bunkers. The man was skilled, but he had to follow predetermined routes that were now becoming visible to the experienced sergeant. "All stations, watch for movement patterns in the sand. These guys have been digging tunnels and pathways for months. If you can read the signs, you can predict where they'll go next." Thompson's voice crackled over the radio. "I see it, Sarge. There's a depression in the sand running from the collapsed bunker toward that pile of rocks at 2 o'clock. That's their escape route. Cut them off." But as Thompson moved to intercept, something unexpected happened. The sand 50 meters in front of Rodriguez suddenly erupted upward, and a figure emerged like something from a nightmare. The sniper had been underground the entire time, moving through a tunnel system that allowed him to appear almost anywhere in the valley. He rose from the sand less than 30 meters away, rifle already aimed at Rodriguez's chest. Time seemed to slow as the two soldiers faced each other across the desert wasteland. The enemy sniper was exactly what Rodriguez had suspected, a foreign fighter with professional military training. His equipment was expensive and well-maintained, his movements precise and calculated. But Rodriguez had spent 3 tours learning to survive in this environment, and his instincts had been sharpened by countless life-or-death encounters. Instead of trying to bring his rifle up to firing position, which would have been too slow, Rodriguez threw himself sideways and rolled behind a small sand berm. The sniper shot past through the space where he had been standing just a split second earlier. "Target in the open," Rodriguez shouted over the radio. 30 meters east of my position." The squad responded instantly, concentrating their fire on the exposed sniper. But the man was already moving, diving back toward the tunnel entrance he had emerged from. Rodriguez wasn't going to let him escape that easily. The sergeant sprinted across the sand, reaching the tunnel entrance just as the sniper disappeared underground. Without hesitation, Rodriguez followed him into the darkness. The tunnel was narrow and low, barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. Rodriguez could hear movement ahead of him as the sniper tried to reach another exit point. The air was stifling, filled with sand and the smell of human sweat. Moving through the tunnel in near-total darkness, Rodriguez relied on his hearing to track his quarry. The sniper was moving quickly, but not quietly. Apparently, he hadn't expected to be pursued underground. The tunnel system was more extensive than Rodriguez had imagined. Side passages branched off in multiple directions, creating a maze that could easily confuse an unwary pursuer. But Rodriguez had noticed something during his brief glimpse of the sniper. The man favored his left side, suggesting an old injury or natural preference that would influence his choice of routes. Following this logic, Rodriguez took the left branch whenever the tunnel divided. The sounds ahead of him grew closer, confirming that his guess had been correct. Suddenly, light appeared ahead, another tunnel entrance. Rodriguez could see the sniper silhouetted against the opening as he prepared to emerge into daylight. This was Rodriguez's chance. The sergeant lunged forward, grabbing the sniper's ankle just as the man tried to climb out of the tunnel. Both soldiers tumbled back into the narrow space, wrestling for control in the confined darkness. The enemy fighter was skilled in close combat, using techniques that Rodriguez recognized from Special Forces training. But Rodriguez had advantages of his own, superior size and strength, plus the desperation that comes from protecting his men. The fight was brutal and silent, conducted entirely in the cramped confines of the underground tunnel. Both men knew that the winner would live while the loser would die in the sand beneath the Afghan desert. Rodriguez managed to get his hands on the sniper's rifle, wrenching it away and tossing it deeper into the tunnel where neither of them could reach it. The fight became a contest of knives and bare hands, with each man trying to gain a decisive advantage. Above ground, the rest of the squad could hear the muffled sounds of combat coming from beneath the sand. Thompson was trying to locate the tunnel entrance that Rodriguez had used, but the opening had collapsed behind him. "Sarge, can you hear me?" Thompson called into his radio, but there was no response from underground. In the tunnel, Rodriguez finally managed to pin his opponent long enough to land a decisive blow. The enemy sniper went limp, either unconscious or dead. In the darkness, it was impossible to tell which. Rodriguez searched the man quickly, finding documents that confirmed his suspicions. The sniper was indeed a foreign fighter, probably trained by special forces from another country before being sent to Afghanistan to train local Taliban units in advanced tactics. But more importantly, Rodriguez found a detailed map showing the location of other tunnel systems and prepared positions throughout the region. This wasn't just one ambush site. It was part of a much larger network that posed a serious threat to American forces operating in the area. Rodriguez made his way toward the light of the tunnel entrance, emerging into the blazing desert sun with dirt and sand covering his uniform. His squad immediately surrounded him, relieved to see their sergeant alive. "Status report," Rodriguez called out, checking on his men. "Martinez is stable," Chun reported. "The bleeding has stopped, but he needs evacuation as soon as possible." "Other enemy positions?" "No more movement detected. We think the others withdrew when they saw their leader go underground." Rodriguez looked around the valley with new understanding. What had seemed like a simple ambush had actually been a test of a new enemy tactic, using elaborate tunnel systems to create mobile sniper positions that could appear anywhere on the battlefield. "Thompson, get on the radio to headquarters. Tell them we've discovered a new threat and we need engineers out here to map these tunnels." "What about the sniper?" Rodriguez glanced back at the tunnel entrance, which had partially collapsed during his underground fight. "He's not coming back up." The squad began preparing for extraction, with Chun continuing to monitor Martinez's condition while the others established a defensive perimeter. But Rodriguez continued studying the map he had taken from the enemy sniper. The implications were disturbing. If the enemy had managed to build this extensive tunnel network without being detected, they might have similar systems near other American bases and patrol routes. The war was evolving again, and American forces would need to adapt their tactics accordingly. As the evacuation helicopter appeared on the horizon, Rodriguez reflected on the day's events. They had survived a carefully planned ambush and discovered valuable intelligence about enemy capabilities. But more importantly, they had learned that even in the vast emptiness of the desert, danger could literally emerge from beneath their feet. The sniper who had risen from the sand would never threaten American soldiers again. But Rodriguez knew that others like him were probably already preparing similar positions in other parts of the country. The war in Afghanistan continued to evolve, and survival depended on staying one step ahead of an enemy who was constantly developing new ways to kill American soldiers. Today, Rodriguez and his squad had won that deadly game of adaptation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new threats emerging from the endless sand of the Afghan desert. As the helicopter landed and medics rushed to treat Martinez, Rodriguez took one last look at the valley where they had nearly died. The sand had already begun covering the evidence of their battle, just as it had hidden the enemy tunnels for months before this day. In the desert, secrets stayed buried until someone was smart enough or lucky enough to uncover them. Today, Rodriguez had been both.